Hey guys, welcome to the Binge Zone. On today's episode, we are going to be recapping season 1 of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, and let's just jump into it. In the very beginning, we're introduced to the character of Sabrina and her boyfriend Harvey, as well as Sabrina's two friends Rosalind and Susie, who bump into Mrs. Wardell, who is a teacher at their high school, and Mrs. Wardell says she can't stay and has to go home to grade papers. On her way home, however, she swerves out of the way and avoids hitting a young girl. Mrs. Wardell takes this young girl back to her house and tries to figure out who this young girl is. However, the young girl kills her and possesses her body. Now we come to find out that this young girl is actually Mrs. Satan, the right hand of the Dark Lord, whose task is to bring Sabrina and convert her to the religion of the Dark Lord and make sure that she becomes subordinate to the Dark Lord. While this is happening, Sabrina is walked home by Harvey, who declares his love for Sabrina. However, she doesn't reciprocate the feelings verbally, and at the same time, we're introduced to Zelda and Hilda, Sabrina's aunts who've taken care of her since her parents died when she was a child, as well as we're introduced to her cousin Ambrose. Zelda, her aunt, wants her to pick a familiar from a book. Now, familiar is a goblin that takes the form of an animal and acts as a guardian to your witch. However, Sabrina doesn't just want to pick one from a catalog. She actually wants to form a bond with her familiar, so she sends out an open call to any goblin who would consent to actually being her familiar. While she is doing this, we're introduced to Prudence, Agatha, and Dorcas, three sisters who don't want her to come to the Academy of the Unseen Arts, the school for witches, because she's a half-breed and they don't believe that they should be mixing with half-breeds. And that begins to stir up some doubts within Sabrina, and she tells her aunts that she's having doubts about actually joining the School of Unseen Arts and becoming a full-time witch. But her aunt Zelda quickly dismisses that notion. However, her aunt Hilda tells her that she also had doubts about joining the School of Unseen Arts and becoming a full-time witch herself. So Ambrose, her cousin, tells her that she should seek advice from Malum Malice, which is a sort of fruit tree that gives you clarity and vision of what you should be. Now, the newly possessed Mrs. Wardell wants to make sure that the Malum Malice doesn't show Sabrina a path where she doesn't become a witch, and her plans are thwarted by her new familiar, who is Salem, the black cat the goblin has taken the form of. When Sabrina gets back home from the Malum Malice, we're introduced to Father Blackwood, who is the high priest of their coven, the principal of the Academy of the Unseen Arts, and the father of Agatha, Prudence, and Dorcas. And Father Blackwood's pretty convincing and assures her that she isn't really turning her soul over to the Dark Lord. It's more of a symbolic gesture, even though he's lying. He comes off as pretty convincing. Back at the human school, Susie is confronted by bullies and she gets suspended after she attacks them. Sabrina wants to press charges. However, Susie doesn't want to get that far, so Sabrina just settles for the names of the bullies and she tries to report them to the school principal, who does nothing about it. So she decides to take matters into her own hands and she summons Prudence and her sisters, and she promises them if they help her, she wouldn't attend the School of the Unseen Arts. However, she's lying because she crosses her fingers while she makes this promise. Meanwhile, Zelda is mad at Hilda for expressing her doubts to Sabrina and kills Hilda. Now, Prudence and Sabrina come up with a plan and they lure the bullies to the mines, and the bullies go thinking they're going to make out with these hot girls. And while they're making out in things that are hot and heavy and steamy, we see Sabrina starts to take pictures of them, and the boys are actually making out with themselves. Prudence cast an illusionary spell over the boys, and they thought they were making out with the girls, but they were really making out with themselves. And Sabrina has pictures of them making out with each other, and she's going to use that as blackmail if they ever bully Susie again. At the same time, Prudence also takes away the boys' manhoods so they can no longer get aroused. And Prudence also tells Sabrina that she knew Sabrina was lying, but she doesn't need an excuse to torture mortal boys. Hilda is resurrected in time to send Sabrina off to her final Halloween with her mortal friends, and at 12 a.m. she enters the woods, and Father Blackwood, her aunts, and the entire coven is waiting for her. She begins the ceremony and promises to put the Dark Lord over everything and everyone she loves and to obey him without question. However, that's when she actually doubts joining the church and the coven because she doesn't want to follow any orders without question, and Sabrina gets sued by the coven for breach of contract by not signing the Book of the Beast, and which law says you are guilty until proven innocent. And Father Blackwood tells Sabrina that her only plan is to beg the Dark Lord for mercy, but Sabrina's never one for begging. Ambrose tells her about a human lawyer who has gone toe-to-toe against the Dark Lord many of times in Demon Court. When Sabrina seeks out that lawyer, the lawyer initially refuses but ultimately decides to help her as he owes her father one. Father Blackwood, however, has a trump card. Sabrina's father signed her name in the Book of the Beast days after she was born, and that was a condition that he had to make in order to marry his human wife. Aunt Hilda reveals that the day before Sabrina's father signed her name into the Book of the Beast, her mother baptized her. And that threw the whole court case into disarray. Hilda's excommunicated from the coven because of signing Sabrina's name into a Christian Bible and getting her baptized. And Sabrina now has to go to both the human school as well as going to the Academy of Unseen Arts, as well as attending Black Mass. In Sabrina's first weekend as a dual citizen of both witching and human world, she has to stand up her human friends and begin to pack to go to the academy. There she meets Nicholas Scratch, a warlock who has a real fascination with her father. Meanwhile, her human friends who she stood up are having a girls' night and it's not going as planned. Susie reveals that her Uncle Jesse is sick and Rosalind agrees to stay with Susie the entire weekend. During Sabrina's first night, she goes through a harrowing, which is essentially a witch hazing done by Prudence, who locks her in a cell overnight, and she's almost driven mad until Salem comes and saves her. And Father Blackhood calls Sabrina into his office with Zelda by his sides, and they give her a mystical Rubik's Cube called the Acheron configuration, and she has to solve it. On the following night, the hazing continues, and her aunts try to talk to Father Blackwood about it. However, he decides he's not going to do anything, and Hilda decides that they should take matters into their own hands because Aunt Hilda has also been harrowed. Rosalind and Susie bring Harvey to talk to Uncle Jesse to relate, since Harvey also saw something in the mind, and they thought that maybe that could help Uncle Jesse out, and he tries to attack Harvey. When Sabrina leaves the academy to go to human school, Nicholas gives her a gift, and that gift is her father's journal, and she could use it to try to solve the Acheron. She solves it and it breaks apart in her hands, and then there's a demon at her door. The demon at her door is not just your average demon. This is a sleep demon that goes by the name of Batibat. The demon ends up wreaking havoc on the Spellmans, putting them all in separate dreams and tortures them with their worst nightmares. Miss Wardell comes in and helps Sabrina break out of the trap that the demon set up, and they end up defeating the demon. Sabrina is now bothered by how Mrs. Wardell is able to actually help her escape the demon, and decides to confront Mrs. Wardell. And Mrs. Wardell lies to her and tells her that she was a student and admirer of Sabrina's father and promised him that she would protect Sabrina. And ever since the sleepover, Harvey, Rosalind, and Susie have been getting visited by Uncle Jesse as a demon who calls out their fears and insecurities. Sabrina decides to astral project into Uncle Jesse's room to see what type of demon is possessing him, but the demon is so powerful that he's able to attack her even through astral projection. Sabrina goes back to her aunts and Mrs. Wardell, and together they decide to exorcise the demon from Uncle Jesse. Father Blackwood is made aware of this, and he ends up waiting for the Spellmans back at their home, and he wants them to give him a good reason why he should not excommunicate them from the church. And Zelda is able to talk him into not excommunicating them by offering to be a magical midwife to Father Blackwood's wife. Thanksgiving comes around, and the witches themselves don't actually participate in Thanksgiving. They actually participate in something called the Feast of Feasts, a ceremony where one witch is chosen from 14 nominees to sacrifice themselves in honor of the witches from centuries ago who sacrificed themselves in order for the church not to die of starvation. This year, the Spellmans are chosen to send a representative, and Zelda volunteers herself. In the mortal world, Miss Wardell has assigned her class to learn more about their family history, and Susie learns that a woman in her family used to wear men's clothing, and Rosalind learns that while she is going blind, she's developing a sixth sense, and Harvey learns that his family used to be witch hunters, and Prudence is now chosen to be the sacrifice at the feast. Sabrina and Miss Wardell try to convince Prudence against sacrificing herself, and Prudence meets Harvey and knows him by his last name as a witch hunter. Now later that evening, when they actually have the feast, Lady Blackwood eats truth cake and reveals that she actually set Prudence up to be the sacrifice. However, another witch who is more devout kills herself in Prudence's place, and they feast on her instead. The next morning, Agatha and Dorcas are plotting revenge on Harvey and create a voodoo doll of him and his brother and crush those voodoo dolls with rocks. Aunt Zelda gets a call and there's an accident at the mine. Sabrina runs there and finds out that Harvey is safe. However, no one can fit through the debris except for Susie, who is guided by her ancestor Dorothea and returns with Tommy's bloody helmet. Ambrose, with the help of Aunt Zelda, astral projects into the mines and finds out that there are no survivors. So Harvey's father, desperate for insurance check, calls off the search and assumes Tommy is dead. Sabrina asks Hilda how she's able to come back to life after Aunt Zelda killed her, and Hilda explains that their front yard has something called a cane grave, which allows witches to come back from the dead if they're buried within there. However, it does not work on mortals. At Tommy's funeral, Harvey and his father get into an argument and fight over the rushing of Tommy's funeral, knocking over the casket, and Rosalind picks up Tommy's hat and she gets her first visions. While this is happening, Aunt Zelda and Father Blackwood confide in each other, and they end up having sex. And after stealing the Book of the Dead from Mrs. Wardell's office, Sabrina finds out about the dolls and summons Prudence, who is angry at her sisters for acting out without her and decides that she's going to help Sabrina resurrect Tommy. And Nicholas is curious as to see is this going to happen, so he decides that he is going to watch. During the ritual, they sacrifice Agatha. Sabrina runs to Harvey's house and finds out that Tommy is back. And Harvey explains that Tommy isn't speaking or eating. At the same time, Agatha is coughing up dirt because something seems to have gone wrong in this resurrection. That night, Rosalind has a dream and she sees that dogs are eating at Tommy's body and agrees to go with Sabrina to go see Tommy. Ambrose, now at the academy, gets his own familiar and gets busy with Luke. When Rosalind touches Tommy, she sees that his soul is stuck in Limbo while his body is on Earth. Sabrina wants to go to Limbo and get his soul back. However, Aunt Hilda is furious that Sabrina actually resurrected Tommy despite her telling her not to. And Sabrina decides that she's going to bring Tommy back whether Aunt Hilda wants to or not. Dorothea, Susie's ancestor, reveals that the Spellmans come from a long line of witches, and Susie and Ross begin to suspect that Sabrina might be a witch, and they grow weary of her. When Sabrina wants to go to Limbo, Zelda and Hilda refuse to help her, and Miss Wardell is the only one who helps her, and Sabrina enters Limbo while Miss Wardell stays back as her anchor to bring her back to the mortal plane. But before she's able to save Tommy, Tommy's soul is claimed by soul eaters. Sabrina goes to visit Harvey, who sends her away, and then she hears a gunshot coming from to Harvey's house, and Harvey has actually shot Tommy himself. The final episode of the season begins with Sabrina distraught and in bed for days, and Aunt Zelda convinces her that she has to go to school and face Harvey. When she gets to school, she tells Rosalind and Susie everything. Miss Wardell hopes that this would scare her friends away. However, when it doesn't work, Miss Wardell decides to sacrifice a virgin football player to summon the Greendale 13. The Greendale 13 are 13 witches who were hunted and hung by mortals during the old days of witching hunts. And during the time that they were being hunted, their own coven shunted them aside and did not help them. Now, they want revenge against both humans and witches. They don't care. At the same time, the statue at the Academy of Unseen Art starts to bleed, and Luke and Ambrose spot the Greendale 13 summoning the Red Angel of Death. Sabrina then finally approaches Harvey, and after they have a small talk, he tells her that he can't ever look at her again without seeing his brother Tommy. When the Coven finds out what the Greendale 13 are doing, they decide to hide out at the Academy and leave the mortals to lose their firstborn sons to the Greendale 13. However, the Spellmans decide that they're going to save the mortals by gathering them at the school and protecting them. Harvey doesn't trust witches and won't let them protect them, so he goes home, and Sabrina tasks Luke with the task of protecting Harvey. And while she goes to find Rosalind decides to stay home with her grandmother, who refuses to leave, and Susie decides that she's going to stay with them and support them. Father Blackwood summons Zelda because that night Lady Blackwood is going to labor, and Luke teleports Ambrose, leaving just Hilda and Sabrina alone to protect the mortals from the Green 13 and the Angel of Death. However, they're not strong enough. Lacking the power to protect them, Miss Wardell convinces Sabrina to sign her name to the Book of the Beast to gain powers, and she does, getting enough power to defeat the Greendale 13 and the Angel of Death. At the same time, Lady Blackwood dies during childbirth, and one of the kids died, leaving only one male heir with Father Blackwood. However, Zelda lied to Father Blackwood, saying the other child was killed, and she stole the firstborn daughter, fearing that Father Blackwood would kill the child because he wants a male heir. Sabrina now has a total makeover with white hair, and she stops by Harvey to apologize to him, and Sabrina leaves to fully embrace her witch/dark side. And the season ends with Miss Wardell confessing who she is to Principal Hawthorne, and she then eats him alive, and she reveals that her plan isn't just to have Sabrina just join the Dark Lord, but she wants Sabrina to replace her as his underling so she could take her place as the wife and stand side by side to the Dark Lord. Anyway, guys, that's the recap for season 1 of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. I hope you guys liked this video. If you do, definitely hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button if you guys haven't already, and until next time, binge on.